I used to think a wedding would be the happiest day in a girl's life. A sparkling white dress, the proud smiles of parents, and a man waiting for me at the end of the aisle with eyes full of love. But when the music swelled in that elegant hall, all I felt was a choke of grief pressing against my chest. The man standing at the end of the red carpet was Nathaniel Cross. 42 years old, a name that made the business world tremble. People called him cold-blooded, never letting emotions interfere with work. I heard rumors that once, during a contract signing, if a partner's hand trembled while signing, he would find reason to cancel the deal. A man like that was now my husband. I, a 23-year-old girl who had nothing but youth, and a family drowning in debt. The wedding was so lavish it felt suffocating. Crystal chandeliers blazed from the ceiling. White roses lined the aisle, and glittering gowns swayed with every step. Everything was perfect, but none of it belonged to me. Even the smile I forced onto my face felt like a mask. Hiding the truth that my heart was shaking, my father sat in the front row, his tired eyes brightening with relief. I knew well that the debt that had almost buried our family would be wiped clean after this ceremony. My mother secretly wiped at the corners of her eyes. Whether from emotion or guilt, I couldn't tell. I wanted to blame her, to blame the world for pushing me into a loveless marriage. But when I saw the deep wrinkles etched on her face, I couldn't bring myself to speak. I walked down the red carpet, each step treading on my fear. Nathaniel's gaze was fixed on me, gray and cold as steel. There was no tenderness, no warmth, only scrutiny, assessment, as if he were examining an investment contract. For a moment, I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt chained, pulling me toward him. The vows were spoken. I heard myself say, "I do," but it felt as if someone else had spoken for me. When Nathaniel slipped the ring onto my finger, the diamond band glittered like a shackle. A firm clasp of the hand, a perfunctory kiss brushed across my lips. Everything happened too quickly. Too foreign, when the reception wound down and guests departed one by one, I felt as if I'd been through a storm. My wedding dress was heavy, my feet ached from high heels, and the fake smile on my face was nearly frozen. But the true tempest still lay ahead. That evening, we drove to the Halewood Seaside Resort, where Nathaniel had booked the presidential suite. When the door closed behind us, the congratulatory laughter and raucous music disappeared. Only the vast room, him and me, remained, and my heart felt like it stopped. I kicked my heels into a corner, sat on the sofa, and massaged my sore feet. Outside the window, the ocean stretched endlessly. The waves lapped the shore like a reminder. I had truly been swept into a journey with no escape. Nathaniel took off his coat and loosened his tie, but his demeanor remained so stern it frightened me. "Tired?" his husky voice asked. I nodded slightly. "A little?" Today was so long. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. I only dared whisper, "Water, please." When his hand offered me the glass, our fingertips brushed. A strange electric shiver ran along my spine. I quickly bowed my head to hide my embarrassment. "We need to talk about expectations." He sat down opposite me, eyes never leaving mine. My chest tightened. I knew exactly what that meant. The contract was already set. I would be the perfect wife in the public eye. Our private life he intended to keep at a distance. I inhaled, bracing for cold terms. But when I looked up, I caught his gaze, and for a brief instant, something fragile, almost vulnerable, flickered behind the gray. "Are you scared?" he asked, not an accusation, but with an almost unbelievable gentleness. I couldn't hide it. "Yes, a little." He fell silent, then leaned back, giving me room to breathe. "Don't be afraid. I'm not the monster the papers make me out to be. At least not to you." I stared at him, stunned. In my chest, a tiny spark of hope ignited. Perhaps this marriage wouldn't be only a shackle. Perhaps beneath that cold exterior there was a man who could listen, who could be gentle. But even as that thought took root, I could still hear the ocean roaring outside. My wedding night began with a half-hearted promise, and I didn't know what dawn would bring. A little warmth or a new storm that would sweep me away. I couldn't sleep that whole night. Moonlight poured into the room, spreading across the pristine white sheets, but I lay there with my eyes wide open, listening to the steady breath of the man beside me. My wedding night was nothing like what I'd imagined. There was neither the roughness I feared nor the tenderness I secretly hoped for. It was something strange, half distant, half cautious. He treated me with care, as if I were a fragile object. I still remember his eyes when I confessed that I was still a virgin. For a moment, the cold wall around him crumbled, revealing a warmth that left me bewildered. And during that long night, he was gentler than I had expected. But when the sun rose, everything seemed to vanish. I woke up to the hollow emptiness of the large bed. His jacket hung over the armchair, but the room no longer held anyone's breath but mine. I sat up, hugged a pillow, and felt hollowed out. What had last night been, after all? The beginning of something, or just a random moment in which he revealed a sliver of himself? I drew back the curtains and let the morning light flood in. The sea outside was deep blue, waves rolling as if to remind me that whether I wanted it or not, I was now Nathaniel Cross's wife. A marriage arranged with no way out. When I went down to the terrace for breakfast, he was already there, sitting rigidly upright, a tablet before him. His white shirt was crisply ironed, his tie perfectly knotted. There was no trace of the man who had sighed when he touched me last night. He looked like the perfect portrait of a magazine CEO, cold, distant, and utterly removed from my world. "Good morning," I said, forcing calm into my voice. He glanced up. His gray eyes flicked over me. "Sleep well?" "So-so." I managed a small smile. But it cracked when he put the tablet down, laced his fingers on the table, and spoke in that measured tone that sounded like the start of a meeting. "We need to be clear about a few things." My heart sank. I knew this moment would come, but I hadn't expected it so soon. I set my teacup down and sat up straight, waiting. Last night, he paused, choosing his words. Last night was necessary. The marriage needed to be confirmed, so there would be no room for doubt. I froze. "Necessary?" I repeated, voice trembling. "Are you talking Abu thought?" His gaze did not waver. "Yes, you must understand. We can play the roles of husband and wife in public. Smile, hold hands, appear together. But behind this door, our lives will be separate. You will have your space. I will have mine. We will not let feelings interfere." My hands clenched white. His words were like knives driven straight into my heart. I had feared this, but hearing it spelled out still felt like something precious had been taken from me. So I bit my lip, trying to keep calm. "I'm just a role. Something you put on display to show the world you have a perfect wife. Don't be dramatic." He raised an eyebrow. His casual tone made the sting worse. "You're financially secure. Your family's debts will be cleared. I have a wife who keeps the press from prying. That's a fair arrangement." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "A fair arrangement. So what about last night? Was that a clause in the contract too?" He said nothing. His silence answered everything. I pushed back my chair with a screech. "Do you know, Nathaniel? I thought I was a puppet in this marriage. But it turns out you're even crueler. You turned my feelings into a transaction." He tightened his jaw, but his eyes remained cold. "You'll learn to accept it." For the first time, I looked him in the eye without fear. "Perhaps, but don't expect my gratitude. Last night, you treated me as if I were something precious. Today, you tell me it was only to confirm things. If that's not deception, then what is?" He offered no reply, only that dense gray stare, like a sea trying to hide an undercurrent. I turned my back and walked away, my chest full of humiliation, anger, and a sorrow so deep it seemed to swallow me whole. When the door closed behind me, I knew one thing. If he thought I would meekly be his doll in a glass case, he was mistaken. I would play his perfect wife in public, exactly as he wanted. But inside, I swore that one day he would have to answer for this contradiction. I am not a living contract. I am a human being, and I will not let love, even the smallest flicker of it, be buried beneath cold terms. 3 weeks after the wedding, I began to feel like a ghost in the very house called our home. The villa sat on the mountainside, magnificent and flawless, like a fortress. Each morning, sunlight streamed through enormous panes of glass and fell on the cold marble floors. My footsteps echoed along the long corridors like the lonely sound of a stranger. Nathaniel usually left before 7, walking with decisive strides, leaving behind a hint of woody cologne. By the time I went down to the kitchen, his car was already gone along the winding road toward the city. My days fell into a loop, reading in the library, wandering through gardens tended so carefully that no wildness remained, or exchanging a few polite words with Mrs. Chen, the longtime housekeeper. She was kind and gentle, yet kept a distance as if afraid of revealing something she shouldn't. Dinners were the rare moments we appeared together. He sat at one end of the long table, I at the other. Between us lay rows of candles, white porcelain, and gleaming cutlery. Our conversation was limited to, "How was your day?" "Ordinary, yours?" "Work." Then silence. The clink of knife on plate rang through the vast room, sharper than any other sound. I ate in that hush, wondering if anyone in the world would call this a marriage. At night, we retreated to opposite wings of the house. My room faced east, his faced west. Each time I walked toward the staircase, I would hear his door close, solid and final. Between us lay an unbridgeable distance, like two parallel worlds that only touched when absolutely necessary. What hurt me more than the distance, however, was the memory of our first night. I still remembered that fleeting gentleness in his eyes, the way his hand trembled when it touched me. That was not an illusion. I knew I hadn't been mistaken. Yet by daylight he donned his steel shell again, denying that moment entirely. It made me feel intoxicated with a fragile hope, then punish myself for clinging to nothing. One afternoon, while the light was still soft, I heard a sound from downstairs. Nathaniel was usually at the office at this hour. I stepped out of my room, walked down the long hall, and paused at the slightly ajar library door. Through the crack, I saw him. His jacket had been removed, his tie loosened, top buttons undone. He was slumped in a leather chair by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquor in his hand. What froze me was his expression. There was none of the authoritative, controlled Nathaniel Cross. Before me sat a tired man, shoulders slack, eyes hollow, staring into the liquor's color. I don't know how long I stood there. With each passing second, I realized he was human to capable of fatigue and pain, just concealing it skillfully. A strange impulse pulled me into the room. "Tough day?" I asked softly, afraid of startling him. He looked up, surprise flashing in his gray eyes. "Yeah, hey, have you been here long?" "I just happened to pass by." I lifted the book in my hands as an excuse. "You seem not well." For a moment, I expected him to brush me off or mask it with a polite smile. But he was silent, then nodded toward the opposite chair. "Sit, if you want to." I sat, my heart pounding. The library was quiet. The setting sun poured through the high windows, bathing the room in gold. I had never felt such an intimacy between us. He swirled his glass. Voice hoarse. "Have you ever felt that everything you build could vanish overnight?" I shook my head honestly. "No, but I can imagine it. And it's terrifying." He gave a brief, bitter smile. I used to think I could control everything. Turns out, some things are never within reach. I listened, waiting for him to continue. By instinct, I knew I was standing before a rare door he might open. "Nathaniel," I ventured, unsure if I should ask. "What took away your trust?" His gray eyes darkened. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out over the garden below. The evening light cast him in a gloomy silhouette. His voice dropped so low, I had to lean in. "A woman?" I fell silent. I knew he had been married before, but he had never spoken of it. That answer opened a space full of shadow. He said no more, yet I understood. Behind the stone walls Nathaniel had built was an unhealed wound, shaped like a woman's absence. That night, back in my room, I sat long by the window and stared into the dark courtyard. I thought of his weary eyes, of that half-spoken sentence. A surge of compassion rose in me. I did not know what our future held, but one thing was clear. I did not want to continue living as a shadow. I wanted to uncover the truth behind those stone walls. And if I could, I wanted to be the one to knock. I had thought that afternoon was merely a fleeting moment, a chance crack in the steel wall Nathaniel had built around himself. But it wasn't. It was more like a door ajar, and I decided not to miss the chance to step through. The next day, when he returned earlier than usual, I mustered the courage to find him in the library. I remembered how the previous sunset had transformed the room into something different. No longer a cold chamber of books and wood, but a place where I'd once glimpsed his true self. He sat in the leather chair by the fireplace, still looking weary, though his eyes were less hollow this time. When I entered, he only glanced up, then nodded as if granting permission. I took the opposite chair, my heart pounding. "You once said," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "that a woman had taken your faith away." His pale gray eyes rested on my face. I expected him to brush it off, change the subject, or fall silent as he usually did. But after a moment's hesitation, he sighed, as though tired from hiding the truth for too long. "Deborah," he named her in a low voice. My ex-wife. My chest tightened. I had heard whispers of her in the press and through friends, but I never expected him to speak her name. "We were together 5 years, he said, his tone even as if reciting a report. At first, I thought I'd found a companion. She was beautiful, intelligent, graceful in public. I thought she was the one to stand beside me." I nodded quietly. He swirled his drink. The firelight carved sharp lines into his stern features. "But in the last 2 years," he continued, "she had an affair with my closest business partner. Not only that, they siphoned funds from projects, moved money to offshore accounts. When I found out, Deborah didn't deny it. She laughed and told me I was a fool for believing anyone could ever truly love someone like me." I held my breath. In his eyes, I saw something different. Not rage, but a smoldering pain rooted deep. I lost half my assets. I lost a friend I trusted most. And more than anything, his voice faltered, dropping almost to a whisper. I lost the belief that I deserved to be loved. My heart ached. I wanted to lay a hand on him, but feared that closeness would make him shudder the walls again. I only whispered, "No one should have to hear words like that, especially not from someone who once vowed to stay." He offered a bitter little smile. After that, I learned one thing: love is a luxury. The only things you can trust are contracts, figures, clauses. One hurt was enough. I looked into those gray eyes and saw the abyss within. Suddenly, I no longer saw Nathaniel Cross, the icy CEO the world knew. I saw a man who had once believed, had once loved, and had been crushed by betrayal. Nathaniel I said his name for the first time without trembling. "I am not Deborah." He looked up, a hint of disorientation in his gaze. "I don't know if I can make you trust again," I went on, my heart pounding like a drum. but I swear I will not betray you. I don't want your wealth or your power. I just want to live as a person in this marriage, not as a shadow." The room fell silent. I could almost hear the crackle of the fire. Then he put his glass down and stood. Closing the distance between us, he stared at me for a long time, measuring, skeptical, and perhaps hiding a small spark of hope. "You're very young," he said softly. "You don't understand how cruel this world is. And if it's cruel—" I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "If I must live in a marriage I did not choose, I choose to make it mean something. At least I don't want us to be two strangers under the same roof." For the first time I saw his shoulders slump, as if some of the burden he'd carried for years had cracked. "You're reckless," he murmured. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Deborah once said sweeter things and then turned away. I don't want to believe anyone anymore." "Then don't believe right away," I said. "Let time prove itself. But don't slam every door shut forever. If you do, the one who gets hurt is you." His gaze wavered again. For a moment, I saw the conflict between fear and longing. Finally, he turned away, his voice low. "You don't know what dangerous game you're volunteering for." I smiled faintly, though my chest tightened. "Maybe, but at least I'm not afraid." That night, back in my room, I sat long before the mirror. In my eyes, there was no longer only sorrow and fear. Something new had taken root: determination. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. But now I understood the wall he had built was not to imprison me, but to shield him from pain. And if I could, I would be the one to knock patiently on that door until he believed that not everyone walks away. The wind shifted early. Gray clouds rolled together across the sky, plunging the villa into a tense atmosphere as if nature itself sensed something about to happen. I sat in my small reading room, listening to distant thunder. The birds that once chattered in the garden had vanished, leaving a heavy silence. The afternoon dragged. I tried to bury myself in a novel, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. Rain began to fall, pattering on the panes, then growing heavier, striking the glass as if trying to pierce it. Wind howled through the gaps, long gusts like the labored breath of someone being restrained. I curled my knees up and hugged my pillow, feeling my heart swell like the storm outside. Nathaniel wasn't home yet. I checked the clock minutes, stretched the waiting, 7, 8, nearly 9. The sound of an engine rolled into the courtyard. I ran to the corridor, heart pounding as his car slid into the garage, headlights sweeping across the waterlogged yard. The door burst open and he stepped out, his suit soaked, hair tousled by the wind. He didn't use an umbrella, nor did he hurry. He simply let the rain lash him, as if he needed it to wash something away. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught. Only when he entered the foyer did I stammer, "Key, you're completely soaked." He looked at me, and for the first time there was a fierce light in his gray eyes I'd never seen before. "Why are you still awake?" I couldn't sleep. I gripped the edge of my robe. "The storm is heavy." He shrugged off his coat and threw it on a chair with abrupt movements. Water dripped from his hair to the floor. Before I could fetch a towel, he strode straight toward me. His steps were heavy and resolute, making my heart race. 3 weeks, he stopped only a few paces away, his voice hoarse but booming like thunder. 3 weeks, we've lived under the same roof and sat at the same table. Yet, it's like we're strangers. Don't you find that exhausting? I was stunned. You feel it too. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Do you think I'm the only one in pain? Do you think I don't notice the way you look at me when we fall silent? Every night when I cross this hall and hear you stir in the eastern wing, I ask myself why such thick walls must be built. But then he paused and drew in a deep breath. Then I remembered Deborah, and I'm afraid. Her name fell into the space amid the roaring rain. I trembled not from cold, but from the admission itself. He was afraid. Nathaniel Cross, a man everyone called Ironhad, confessed fear. I took a step forward. You may be afraid, but don't make me into a shadow just to protect your old wound. My voice shook, but was firm. I am not her. His gaze flared with a mixture of anger, pain, and yearning. For a moment, I thought he would turn and walk away. Instead, he came closer and seized my shoulders, his breath smelling of rain and whiskey. Yes, you are not her, he whispered, his voice rough. And that is exactly what I can't bear. I looked straight into his gray eyes and saw the storm churning within. Then stop holding back, I said, almost daring him. In an instant, the distance between us collapsed. He bent and his lips found mine hard, urgent as if he had been denying himself for far too long. I reeled, my whole body ignited. The rain drummed outside, but in his arms I heard nothing but our quickened heartbeats. That kiss was unlike any before. It wasn't the hesitancy of our wedding night, nor the perfunctory coolness of an arranged agreement. It was an explosion of desire, of buried pain, of a desperate wish to be real. I returned it, losing track of fear and reason. When we broke apart, both of us were breathless. He pressed his forehead to mine, voice choked. I thought keeping my distance was safe. But I was wrong. Each day I pass through this hall, I find I cannot tear my eyes away from you. Tears rose in me, mixed with a choked laugh. I've been waiting for you to say that. Not for sweet words, but so I would know your heart is still alive. He brushed my hair back gently, his hand trembling. I cannot promise to love you perfectly. I don't know if I even remember how to love. But if you let me, I want to try again. With you? I nodded, tears streaming. I don't need a promise. I just need you not to turn away. The storm outside intensified, but inside that embrace I felt a strange calm. As if amid the tempest, we had finally found each other not in a contract. Not under cold rules, but in the true rhythm of our hearts. That night, the villa stopped feeling like an impenetrable fortress. It became a refuge where two wounded people reached for each other and began to rebuild fragile trust. I knew it wasn't over Deborah, the past, and his fears still remained. But at least I had heard the confession he had kept hidden so long. And I believed that from now on, we would no longer be merely two parallel shadows. After that stormy night, everything in the villa seemed to change. There were no formal announcements. No, from now on, we will or we should. Yet the invisible wall that once separated us had cracked. Through the gaps, light began to creep in. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. For some reason, my heart fluttered as I walked down to the breakfast room. Previously, breakfast was just me and Mrs. Chen, sometimes so quiet I could hear the cutlery against plates. But that morning, Nathaniel was already seated at the table, wearing a pale blue shirt with his tie loosened, holding a steaming cup of coffee. When he looked up at me, his gaze was no longer only scrutiny or indifference. There was something warmer, softer, like a silent greeting. "Good morning," I said, giving a small smile. "Good morning," he replied. Just two simple words. But my heart stirred. We ate breakfast together. Mrs. Chen looked surprised for a moment, then smiled approvingly and slipped back into the kitchen. I wasn't used to this atmosphere, natural yet tentative, as if we were both relearning how to walk on solid ground after an earthquake. Throughout that day, I noticed little changes appearing everywhere. He no longer left the house at dawn. Sometimes he lingered for a few minutes and asked what I had planned for the day. When he returned, he didn't close his door immediately. Instead, he would stop by the library where I read and sit there in silence with me. Just sitting, but the silence carried an entirely different meaning. That evening, for the first time, he invited me to walk in the garden behind the house. The post-rain breeze carried the scent of damp earth and lingering jasmine. The stone path glistened with puddles and fallen leaves. I put on a thin sweater and walked beside him. "Did you plant this garden?" I asked, looking at the neatly trimmed bushes of white roses. "No. It was here before I bought the villa. But I kept it." He bent and broke off a rose, hesitating a moment as if weighing something, then handed it to me. I took it, my heart pricked by the small gesture. The white rose smelled faintly sweet in my hand, and for the first time I saw a hint of awkwardness in his eyes. "Thank you," I said, holding the flower to my chest. "I didn't think you paid attention to things like this." "I didn't think so either." He gave a rare smile. "But maybe I started to notice after you came." The words made me blush. I turned away, hiding my face under the pale moonlight. In the days that followed, that warmth became a habit. Dinners were no longer forced exchanges of small talk. He would tell me a little about work, not in detail, but enough that I no longer felt excluded from his world. In return, I shared trivialities from my day. The book I was reading, attempts at sketching the garden, or discovering a forgotten music room in the attic. One afternoon, I dared to ask him up there. The room was dust-covered, a piano sitting silent in the corner. I wiped the keys and hesitantly pressed them. The notes sounded a bit off, but still beautiful. Nathaniel stood leaning in the doorway, arms folded, his expression softening as he watched me fumble. "You play?" he asked. "A little?" "My mother taught me when I was small." I smiled and played a few simple notes. "But I haven't practiced in years." He stepped closer and sat next to me, his long fingers resting on the keys. "I used to learn too. But like many things, I left it behind." I looked up, surprised. "You could try again." He hesitated, then struck a chord. The sound was heavy, but honest. We sat side by side, fingers on the keys, the awkward melody somehow intimate. As that clumsy tune floated, I felt the distance between us shrink a little more. That night, when I left the music room, he stopped me on the stairs. "Thank you," he said, just 2 words. But in his voice, I heard more than gratitude for the music. I heard thanks for the patience I had shown him. I smiled and answered softly. "I didn't do much. I was just here." He looked at me for a long time, as if he wanted to say something, but then stopped. Finally, he nodded and left quietly, lying in bed that night with the white rose pressed into my book. I replayed every small detail of the day. I knew we were still far from complete trust. He was still afraid. I still had doubts. But at least the villa no longer echoed only lonely footsteps. It had begun to hold music, smiles, and little everyday stories, things I had once believed I would never have here. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise. If he could learn to open his heart, I would learn to wait. And perhaps, through these warm days, we would become not just 2 people sharing a roof, but 2 hearts finding their way back to each other. 3 weeks passed after the night of the storm. I had grown used to the subtle changes in the villa, dinners filled with conversation, afternoons in the rose garden, and sometimes hesitant notes rising from the old piano. Nathaniel did not always bare his soul, but at least he let me glimpse the cracks in the fortress he had built around himself. And I had learned to cherish every one of those cracks. That day, Asheville lay under a heavy sky, the clouds hanging low as though rain were poised to fall. I sat in the library, wrapped in the wool scarf I had knitted, reading a novel I had left unfinished. Nathaniel had promised to come home early so we could have dinner together. A rare promise that made me look forward to the evening all day. But before he returned, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Chen entered with a curious look. "A visitor wishes to see you, Mrs. Blackwood." I looked up, startled. "A visitor?" "She says she is an old acquaintance." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. Before I could ask more, a figure appeared in the doorway. The woman was tall, with golden hair falling in deliberate waves and lips painted a sharp red. A camel-colored coat hugged her slender frame, her heels tapping confidently across the floor. But what froze me was the cold, assessing stare she gave me from head to toe. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, her voice smooth yet edged with steel. "I'm Deborah." My chest tightened. I had heard the name before, but I never thought I would face her directly. Deborah, the woman who had once been Nathaniel's wife. The woman who had left the deepest scars on him. I don't believe my voice wavered. "We had an appointment." "Oh, I know. But some things can't wait." She stepped inside as if the room still belonged to her. I only wanted to see for myself the one who replaced me. I clutched my book tighter, as if it could shield me. "If you have something to say, you should speak to Nathaniel directly." Her smile thinned, her icy blue eyes glinting. "Oh, I will. But first, I want to warn you." "Warn me?" "Don't put too much faith in his newfound warmth. Nathaniel may soften for a while, but his nature is cold and calculating. I know, because I once believed I was the exception. And he crushed me." I inhaled sharply, steadying myself. "If you came here to sow doubt, you've wasted your time." "I'm not you." The corner of her mouth lifted, but her eyes flashed with anger. "We all think we're different until he turns us to ash. Trust me, young lady, I know exactly the kind of man you've staked your life on." Before I could reply, the sound of the front door opening echoed down the hall. Heavy, familiar footsteps. Nathaniel was home. He appeared in the doorway moments later, and the look on his face when he saw Deborah froze the air. Shock, fury, and shadows of the past colliding all at once. "What are you doing here?" His voice dropped low. Dangerous. Deborah turned, her smile softening as if no cutting words had just passed her lips. "Nathaniel, it's been a while. You didn't invite me, so I let myself in. We have unfinished business. There is nothing left between us." He strode forward, instinctively positioning himself between us like a shield. "Our marriage ended long ago." "You think so?" She tilted her head, her gaze sliding toward me. "Some ties don't cut so easily, Nathaniel, and you know it. Get out of my house." His tone was sharp, every word falling like a gavel. Deborah let out a low laugh, laced with bitterness. "Typical of you. Always thinking the world bends to your commands. But you forget, I was the one who stood beside you longest. I know your weaknesses." Her smile vanished, replaced with cruelty. "And I won't hesitate to use them." Nathaniel's fists clenched, but he said nothing. Deborah picked up her purse and turned on her heel. Before stepping out of the library, she cast me one last glance. Sharp as a blade. "Enjoy this little honeymoon while it lasts. Soon enough, you'll understand why I called him ruthless." The door closed. Silence pressed down, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Nathaniel stood rigid, his back taut, his hands trembling with restraint. "Nathaniel," I whispered. He turned, stormlight flashing in his gray eyes. But when he saw the worry on my face, the fury eased. He came to me, clasping my hand tightly, a vow in his grip. "Don't believe a word she says." I nodded, though my chest quivered. "I don't fear her. I only fear what she might do. I won't let Deborah hurt you," he said firmly. Yet in those deep eyes, I saw clearly how the ghosts of the past had been stirred awake. That night I lay awake, turning restlessly. In the darkness, I understood. Deborah wasn't just a shadow from before. She was a storm returning, threatening to shatter the fragile calm we had only just found. And the question echoing in my heart was relentless. Would the tender, fragile love between Nathaniel and me be strong enough to withstand the storm? After Deborah's appearance, the atmosphere in the villa changed. The warm days that had just begun were quickly overshadowed by a heavy feeling. I tried to keep my routine, reading in the library, walking in the garden, sitting at the old piano, but Deborah's words kept echoing in my head. He will crush you, just as he crushed me. Nathaniel, on the other hand, grew even quieter. He left early, returned late, and his gaze always seemed to be somewhere else. At dinner, there were moments when I caught him drifting back into the past. I understood then that Deborah had not only cast a shadow over me, but had reopened something inside him as well. One evening, when the winter wind howled around the glass panes, I decided I could endure it no longer. After dinner, as he rose to leave the table, I spoke, my voice trembling but determined. "We need to talk, Nathaniel." He stopped and turned to look at me. "About what?" "You know what it's about?" I took a deep breath. "About Deborah. About what really happened." A tense silence fell. He set his napkin down and his expression darkened. "Emily, there is nothing in that past you need worry over. It's over." "No," I said, shaking my head, my heart racing. "It's not over. Not while she can show up in this house. Not while I have to hear venom coming from her own mouth. I can't keep walking beside you without knowing the truth." "I deserve to know." He was silent for a long time, then moved to the window and looked out into the dark courtyard. His broad back seemed suddenly heavy, no longer the impenetrable figure the world imagined. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "You want to know everything? Fine, but I warn you, it isn't pretty. After tonight, you may see me differently." I rose and stepped closer, my voice shaking but steady. "Let me decide for myself." He turned. In his eyes, I saw the struggle, a rare fear he did not want anyone to witness. Then he took a long breath and began to tell me. Nathaniel and Deborah married when I was 32. At the time, she was the perfect woman in society's eyes. Beautiful, well-born, poised. I thought I'd found a companion. But it was all a performance. Deborah cared more for money, status, and power than for anything else. He paused and clenched his fist. Over the 5 years, she pretended to love, pretended to care, but behind my back, she and my closest business partner plotted to seize half the company. I drew in a sharp breath. My heart tightened. I had guessed he had been betrayed, but not the cruelty of it. When I discovered it, Nathaniel continued, I didn't recognize the woman I'd called my wife. She laughed in my face and told me. I was naive to think anyone could love a man like me for who he was. His voice faltered, and he looked down at the floor. That was the day everything inside me shattered. I stepped forward, wanting to touch his hand, but he recoiled. I divorced her and paid the settlement, thinking that would be the end. But Deborah never learned to let go. She always wanted more, always more. He looked at me straight on. That is why I built the walls. Why I turned our marriage into a contract. I stopped daring to trust anyone. For me, trust meant handing someone the weapon to destroy me. The room went quiet. My heart felt heavy with pity and pain for him. Yet another sadness crept in. He had assumed I would be like Deborah. And now? I whispered. Do you trust me? Nathaniel closed his eyes as if wrestling. When he opened them, his gaze was conflicted. I want to trust. God, I want to trust you more than anything. But Emily, if you betray me too, I don't know if I can survive it again. My chest tightened. In that moment, I could choose anger at the comparison or patience to prove him wrong. I stepped closer and laid my hand over his heart where it thudded wildly. I am not Deborah, I said, firmly. I don't want your wealth or your status. I want you, the real you, with your scars and your pain. Whether you trust me or not, that is still the truth. Nathaniel looked at me, his eyes wavering between belief and fear. Then, suddenly, he pulled me into his arms, holding me as if that was the only thing preventing him from falling apart. Don't leave me, he murmured into my hair. his voice hoarse. I'm not sure I could bear it. I hugged him, my eyes blurring. I'm not going anywhere. No matter what Deborah says or does, I'm here. We stood like that for a long time until the room contained nothing but the rhythm of our beating hearts. I knew this was not the end. Deborah would return with schemes I could not yet foresee. But at least tonight the truth had been spoken, and I chose to believe him. Still, deep inside, a lingering fear remained. Would our fragile love be strong enough to withstand the destructive games Deborah was quietly preparing? The day Deborah officially took the case to court, Asheville was cloaked in freezing fog. I stood before the mirror in our bedroom, wearing a dark blue blazer dress, formal enough for the courtroom, and just enough to hide the trembling inside me. My belly had only begun to show, not enough for others to notice, but enough for me to feel I was no longer standing alone. Nathaniel appeared behind me, straightening his charcoal tie. His eyes met mine in the glass, gray, tense, and storm-heavy. Are you sure you want to go with me? Of course. I turned, grasping his hand. This is our battle. I won't let you face her alone. His fingers closed tightly around mine. A silent thank you that spoke louder than words. The county courthouse buzzed with people. Cameras flashed as we walked inside. I caught snippets of cruel whispers. She's too young, clearly a gold digger. Is that really Nathaniel's child? Nathaniel's arm wrapped firmly around my waist, drawing me close as though shielding me. Anger simmered in him, but he walked with measured calm, never letting the vultures see a weakness. Across the courtroom, Deborah sat tall in a plain black dress, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek knot. She looked at us with a mixture of pity and disdain. When her eyes locked on me, a thin, cold smile curved her lips, as if victory already belonged to her. The trial began. Deborah's lawyer, a smooth-voiced man, stepped forward first. Your Honor, he said, my client, Mrs. Deborah Blackwood, was coerced into signing divorce papers. She was deceived by Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood, who, during their marriage, carried on an illicit relationship with this young woman, Emily, now his wife. This so-called marriage is nothing more than a sham, staged to shield assets and legitimize an illegitimate child. Gasps rippled through the gallery. I dug my nails into Nathaniel's palm beneath the table. He sat motionless, his face carved from stone. Then Jonathan, our attorney, rose, adjusting his glasses. His voice steady. Your Honor, you will see clear evidence that Mrs. Deborah's claims are nothing but distortion. The marriage between Mr. Blackwood and Mrs. Deborah ended with transparency, with witnesses and legal agreements. The relationship between Mr. Blackwood and Emily began only after the divorce was finalized. We will prove every accusation baseless. When Deborah was called to the stand, she produced flawless tears, her voice trembling. I loved Nathaniel with all my heart. I trusted him. But then I discovered he was sneaking around with this younger woman. She turned her gaze on me, sharp enough to pierce. I was forced to sign those papers because he wanted to flaunt her publicly. I had no choice. I lost everything. My jaw clenched, my hands shaking in my lap. Her lies echoed through the courtroom like truth branded in fire. I could feel the headlines being written outside. Emily, the other woman. Jonathan rose for cross-examination. Double quotes. Mrs. Deborah, you claim coercion. May I ask, was your attorney present when you signed the divorce papers? Yes, but then who coerced you? Do you have any written proof of coercion? No. The room fell silent for a few beats. Deborah pressed her lips together, then quickly summoned more tears. Jonathan pressed on. You also allege an affair between Mr. Blackwood and his current wife before the divorce. Do you have any direct evidence of this? Apart from the blurred photographs already proven by experts to be digitally altered. Deborah stiffened. A murmur rippled among the spectators. Then it was Nathaniel's turn. I held my breath as he walked to the stand, tall but rigid. Jonathan's questions were calm. "Mr. Blackwood, why did you and Mrs. Deborah divorce?" Nathaniel inhaled deeply, then faced the bench. His voice was low but unwavering. "Because she betrayed me. For 2 years, she had an affair with my closest associate while conspiring to siphon off company funds. I have wire transfers, emails, and witnesses. But I refused to drag it into the mud. I chose to end it cleanly, pay the settlement, and walk away." The room erupted in noise. Deborah leaped up. "That's a lie." "You made that up." The gavel slammed for silence. I looked at Nathaniel. His face was no mask now. In his eyes there was pain, raw and unhidden, but also the strength to speak the truth at last. Jonathan asked, "And when did your relationship with Emily begin?" "On our wedding day," Nathaniel replied, his eyes locking with mine. Before that, I had never met her. My chest trembled. The words echoed through the chamber, irrefutable and absolute. Then it was my turn. Jonathan offered to spare me, but I knew I had to stand. As I stepped forward, I felt every gaze drawn to my belly. "I am not the other woman," I said, my voice shaking but growing firmer. I met Nathaniel for the first time on our wedding day. Our marriage didn't begin with love, but I know this: he did not force me, and he did not deceive me. "And the child I carry is my husband's." Whispers rippled, but this time with less certainty. I lifted my chin and faced Deborah directly. "You can invent stories, but you cannot rewrite truth. And the truth is, your marriage ended long ago, not because of me, but because of your betrayal." The proceedings dragged into the evening. When the judge announced more time was needed to review evidence, Nathaniel reached for my hand and held it tightly. "You did well," he whispered as we left the courtroom. I gave him a weary smile. "We haven't won yet, but at least," he said. His eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. We stood together. Outside, camera flashes still burst. The press swarmed. But in that moment, with his hand wrapped around mine, I knew this much: whatever storms Deborah unleashed next. The most important truth was clear. We were no longer alone. When the judge read the final verdict, I clutched Nathaniel's hand so tightly my nails nearly left marks on his skin. In the case of Deborah Blackwood versus Nathaniel Blackwood, the court rejects all allegations. Furthermore, Mrs. Deborah is ordered to cover legal expenses and held responsible for defamatory conduct. Those words rang through the courtroom like a bell of release. I felt Nathaniel's long-suppressed breath escape beside me, his hand trembling as it squeezed mine. Across the aisle, Deborah's face went pale, her eyes blazing with hatred. When her gaze met mine, I knew this storm had never been about money. It was wounded pride, the rage of being replaced. But this time, she had lost. We left the courthouse to a barrage of cameras and reporters shouting questions. "Nathaniel, what do you say about the ruling? Emily, is the baby really his? Deborah, will you appeal?" Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply wrapped an arm around me, pressing me against his chest as he walked straight to the car. For the first time, I realized the media, the rumors, the scrutiny, they no longer had power over us. A week later, life settled back into rhythm. The mountain estate, once cold as a fortress, now radiated warmth. Nathaniel and I lingered over breakfast instead of rushing. He began returning home earlier, walking with me in the garden, resting his hand over my growing belly each night, as if to make sure our child was safe. One late afternoon, as golden light bathed the rose garden, I stood watching new buds sprout. Nathaniel came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "The future," I whispered. "About the baby. About us. I never imagined we'd come this far." He rested his chin on my shoulder, voice low and steady. Neither did I, but one thing I know for certain: nothing matters more than this family. It took me years to understand, but since meeting you, I finally know what it means to have a home. I turned to face him. His once feared face, known across the city as ruthless, was now softened with tenderness. I placed my hand over his chest, where his heart beat strong. "You're not alone anymore, Nathaniel. We're in this together." He kissed me deeply, sealing that promise as my belly grew. Nathaniel became a comically careful husband. He hired a private doctor, called me constantly to ask what I'd eaten, how I'd slept. He even tried cooking chicken soup, the dish I craved most during pregnancy, though the first attempt was nearly inedible. "You're laughing at me, aren't you?" he grumbled, though a smile tugged at his lips as I stifled a giggle. "No, I think it's adorable," I smiled, forcing down a spoonful. "This is the best soup I've ever had because you made it." His gray eyes lit with a joy I'd never seen before. In that moment, I understood. Love wasn't built only on grand gestures or surviving storms. It was in the little things: soup on the table, a hand on my belly, a look that spoke of peace when our son was born on a spring night filled with warm winds. Nathaniel was there, gripping my hand, not letting go. I had never seen him shake like that, sweat soaking his brow as if he were enduring the pain with me. When the first cry pierced the air, his eyes blurred with tears. "Our son," he whispered hoarsely, as the doctor placed the tiny, wrinkled newborn into his trembling arms. I watched the man once feared by all, now cradling something so fragile, his hands unsteady with awe. And I knew every battle we had fought was worth it. He placed the baby in my arms. Small, warm, with eyes fluttering open just enough to reflect the love surrounding him. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not from fear, but from pure joy. "Thank you," Nathaniel murmured, kissing my forehead. "For believing in me, for staying, for giving me a family." I smiled, holding them both. We weathered the storms together. Nothing can divide us now. 4 years later, the villa no longer echoed with emptiness. Children's laughter filled the halls. Mingling with the hesitant notes of the old piano, Nathaniel and I had begun playing again. Our little boy dashed through the rose garden while Nathaniel chased after him. Pretending to be a monster, I sat on a wooden bench, my belly round once more, watching them with a smile. Beside me, Mrs. Chen knitted quietly. "When you first came here, this house was colder than stone. Now it's truly a home." I clasped her hand softly. "Because of everyone." And because he dared to change. I looked toward Nathaniel once, a man barricaded behind icy walls, now laughing freely, his gray eyes glowing with endless love for his son. The scars within him would never fully vanish, but they had become part of the journey that led him here, to me, to our child, to this home. That night, with father and son asleep, I sat by the window under the silver moonlight and wrote in my old journal, "Some loves begin with cold contracts. But if you are brave enough to trust, patient enough to wait, even a contract can become an eternal promise." We chose to stay, and that was the most beautiful decision of our lives. Closing the journal, I placed my hand on my growing belly and smiled. A new beginning was waiting ahead. Maybe you think this is just a fictional story, but sometimes fiction reflects the deepest truths of the heart. Real love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with scars, with trust, and with patience. It gives us a home, a place to belong, and a new beginning, no matter how many storms lie in the past. Thank you for listening to this story with Snail Story. If it touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to share your thoughts.